We are on the eve of the throne speech, which is a real opportunity to change the narrative. The federal government has made positive signals around nuclear energy. Former Minister of Natural Resources, Seamus O'Regan, has been pretty famously positive about nuclear energy, saying that there is no path to net zero without nuclear energy if we're trying to get there by 2050.
We've looked at what solar and wind can do in our communities. There was a WWF study done with University of Waterloo, and it was determined that while there is some value for solar and wind in some of our Nunavut communities, there's no way that we're able to completely get off of diesel with those two renewable options. So we need to be looking at our full sort of energy options and solutions. Also in our small communities, the marketplace is actually a crown corporation. We're going to need significant assistance from the federal government to actually develop energy strategy on how we can get not only our 25 Nunavut communities off of diesel, but the 170 plus Indigenous communities across Canada that are currently on diesel. So that is going to require looking at, everything from the environmental considerations, the population growth, what is nearby, are there mines, can there be cost sharing with the provinces, the territories, the municipalities. We need to be smart about how this is going to happen, which means that we're going to have to, get people in the room, have these assessments done, and look at how we can achieve the ultimate goal and solution, which is to get our northern and our Indigenous communities that are on diesel off of diesel.
Absolutely. And such an important role there for micromodular reactors. Dr. James Hansen, I just had the pleasure of spending a few days with Dr. Hansen in Berlin, where we were actually protesting the closure of Germany's remaining nuclear fleet in the context of them continuing to burn coal for the next 17 years, I think at least is fair to say. So kind of the opposite situation of what Canada accomplished with our coal phase out.
Thanks for inviting me, Chris. I'm really excited about the potential for Canada to be the nation that I've been looking for more than a decade, to show the rest of the world how it's possible to address the climate issue and to do it in a way that is economically beneficial to the nation. At COP26, there was almost no discussion of the two elephants in the room. The first one is we need to make fossil fuels pay their cost to society. Fairly easy to do. Gradually make the price of fossil fuels include their costs through climate change and human health effects of air pollution and water pollution. The other crucial thing is that we need to have electricity that's carbon free. When we get that, we're most of the way to the solution, because we can make liquid fuels from electricity, decarbonize our society if we get carbon-free electricity. And renewables will be very helpful in doing that. And they've received a lot of support from governments, Canada, the United States, and other nations for the last few decades. But they need to be complemented with the electricity source that's available 24/7, that's reliable, and that can make the renewables work. The renewables being intermittent. And the only candidate that we have is nuclear power. And it just so happens that Canada is so well situated. Canada has developed its own nuclear technology, the CANDU reactor, which is great. If Japan had CANDU reactors, they would not have had a nuclear accident. It's a great technology, but the government needs to support it. If that happens, and if Canada pursues the carbon fee and dividend, then boy, that's the example which the world needs. And its neighbor to the south would notice. And I think we'd be then well on the way to a global solution to the climate problem. So I really hope that the government will give this the priority that it deserves.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hansen. The lukewarm signals towards nuclear in Canada so far have been in the form of support for a roadmap and an SMR action plan, which we support and think is very important. However, the government has completely neglected this CANDU program that we have. And the reality is, again, with electrification, with the need to 2 or 3 times our grid capacity, we are going to need a large number of large reactors to do just what we did in Ontario. So places like Alberta are really a good place for us to move next. This is a sector and an area, a province in our country that has an enormous number of skilled tradespeople, from pipe fitters, boilermakers, welders, etc., whose economic prospects have been hit hard by the changes, I'd say, in the tar sands and the fossil fuel industry. Diana, maybe speak to that role for large nuclear.
We definitely need a lot more large nuclear reactors, because in areas with large populations, the small modular reactors aren't quite the solution. But in remote communities, they are definitely part of the consideration that is needed. So they both work in different ways, but in large populations, you need the economy of scale.
We're poised to lose the Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, which again has provided an enormous contribution to the coal phase out. We luckily are refurbishing our CANDU reactors at Darlington and Bruce Power. However, the closure of Pickering again is going to erase 1/3 of the emissions gains we've made as a country. It's going to raise Canada's national emissions by 1%. 1% maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about the entire country. So our organization does call for a refurbishment of Pickering and or a replacement with an equal output or greater output even of traditional CANDU reactors. The SMR plan is to take Pickering offline and bring one SMR online by, I think, 2028. And that will resemble 1/10 of the output of Pickering. So if this is a climate emergency, the fact that one of our cleanest grids in the country is going to be taking a massive step backwards, that's absolutely unacceptable. So we have some major issues in climate policy that need to be dealt with. We hope that we've drawn attention to that with this press conference. This is something that the Canadian government should be incredibly proud of. And when talking about a just transition, this is a sector that is 96% made in Canada. The supply chain is 96% here. It supports a thriving workforce with high quality jobs in the trades and in STEM. And this really is a model for the kind of both clean energy and worker transition that we need. So thank you so much for joining us. We're ready now to take any questions. Oh, sorry.
Chris, there's a question.
There is Aiden Shamandi. 1 second here.
I guess this is one to all of you, but particularly wondering if I could get Dr. Hansen's thoughts on this as well. It's just a general question on why you think there's still such staunch opposition to nuclear power from environmentalists like Guibo that we were talking about.
That's a good question. And I found, I had the opportunity to speak to some of the environmental leaders. They told me there are a few reasons. They would give me reason number one is sort of blah, blah, blah. And reason number two is blah, blah, blah. But then they got to the point. And that is that if they did not remain anti-nuclear, they would lose a significant fraction of their donations. Indeed, a significant part of their donations is from the fossil fuel industry. So I think that is the main reason. But what I've noticed in going to college campuses and talking to young people in general, not just college students, they're not opposed to nuclear power. And in fact, many of them understand that nuclear has the smallest environmental footprint. It's a continuing problem because of the propaganda, which is just not very accurate. One of the things that's focused on is nuclear waste. Well, nuclear waste is well contained, and it's actually fuel for future reactors because most of the energy is still in nuclear material that comes out of the reactor. So it's really valuable material. It's unfortunate that the media continues to put this story forward that nuclear is not environmentally friendly, but in fact, it's the smallest environmental footprint of all the competing energy sources.
Unfortunately, more recently, some of the other ministers who've become prominent in this new government, Stephen Guilbeault, the new Minister of Environment and Climate Change, has a strong record of anti-nuclear activism as a former Greenpeace advocate. And I think Dr. Hansen was giving us some theories as to, the anti-nuclear history of these organizations and why they maintain the positions that they do. But very worrisome that our minister, who's in charge of this critical file, is ignoring the very evidence of our success here in Canada. And not only what we've done in Ontario, what we can model for other high emissions provinces and what we can share with the world, because we have to face Canada was a nation that industrialized fairly early, and we are responsible for a significant portion of the world's emissions. So there's really a role for Canada, for CANDU, for our nuclear technology to be used around the world, and a big opportunity as well economically. Our Minister of Natural Resources, who's replaced Minister O'Regan, Minister Wilkinson, he used to have the environment file, has also been, I would say, a little bit lukewarm on nuclear. The line is that, well, nuclear is going to have to compete, and wind and solar are cheap. But we know that they produce very different kinds of energy. And as Dr. Hansen has said, we need that reliable baseload, especially if we're going to electrify everything, our vehicles, our heating, our cooling. We know that, with extreme weather event, with natural disasters, energy is absolutely essential to keep people alive, such as during the heat dome in British Columbia this summer, when air conditioning was important, especially for elders and other people with health conditions.
O'Regan was very positive. I was at the C4NE conference where he made that speech saying there's no future without nuclear. And now obviously Guilbeault has taken over and they've adopted the line of, everything's got to compete in the market. But like you said, Wilkinson doesn't have the same history as Guilbeault. And at COP, Trudeau said, yes, we have to keep investing in all forms of clean energy, nuclear included. He explicitly said that. So I'm just kind of wondering if you guys can get into a little bit more about what you think of that talking point around everything has to compete in the market, and solar being cheap, which is something that they like to raise a lot.
It's very concerning, this idea that we should leave our energy transition to the market. Frankly speaking, if the government wasn't engaging and identifying the value of urgently addressing climate change, the market would continue to burn fossil fuels. The market, the fact that the idea that the government doesn't intervene in energy policy is absolutely false. As I mentioned earlier, with this same government's purchase of a large pipeline, I believe it was $4.5 billion spent on the TMX pipeline. Again, owning 10% of the Hibernia oil fields. So there's absolutely a role for government to play in steering our energy policy and in steering our just transition and our green transition. And that's why Canadians for Nuclear Energy is adamant that we have to look at the evidence. And we have had unprecedented success. We've done the heavy lifting for North America, the greatest greenhouse gas reduction, not just in Canada, but in the whole of this northern continent. So we think that the government absolutely needs to take a leading role in this area, needs to invest in a sector that has a 96% made in Canada supply chain. The alternative energies do not meet those high standards of labor and of a made in Canada component. I'm sorry myself if I've been a little bit sleepy. I just came off of a night shift and I'm going on about half an hour of sleep, but it's been a real pleasure having you all here. We're very honored to have this all-star panel we've been able to assemble. Thank you so much, Madeline, Diane, and James, for making the time for us today.